Hi, everybody. Welcome to the AIPAC app. My name is Evan Phillipson. I'm AIPAC's Florida Political Director, and we are honored to be joined today by a longtime friend and champion of the U.S. Israel relationship, Congressman Mario Díaz-Balart from Miami. Congressman, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Evan, what a privilege to be able to spend this time with you. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Now, before we get into some of the policy meat, a lot of people around the country don't know your background, your family's background. It really is the classic American dream story. So can you tell us for a minute your family, your background, and why you decided to run for Congress in the first place?
Evan, again, thanks for this opportunity. Look, I'm a very blessed man. You know, my parents were are Cuban exiles. They both have already passed. My father was involved, and my grandfather was involved in pre-Castro politics in Cuba. My grandfather was the mayor of his little town, later became a member of Congress. My father became a member of Congress, the majority leader in the Cuban House of Representatives. And then it all came tumbling down, right? And one of the things that has always, that has never left me is that my dad, at the age of 32, who was, again, the majority leader in Congress, he had gotten elected to the Cuban Senate, never sworn in, had not sworn in yet, and was also at the time happened to be in Europe on a business deal that he had done on his own time outside of Congress, as you could do in those days here in the United States as well. And in essence, goes to sleep December 31st, 1958, as a 32-year-old majority leader who had gotten elected to the Senate, who had just signed a business deal, and basically wakes up the next day with nothing, including no country, no valid passport, and nowhere to go. And so that's how my family's life starts a second time in exile, and spent some time bouncing around different places. We grew up for part of the time in Spain, because that's the one place originally that my dad was able to get into, and then came to the United States. He started the first anti-Castro organization very, very early on, frankly, the same year that Castro took control of that island. And, you know, he was able to go back to school, become a lawyer again in Spain, like my grandfather did already in the 60s, and start life anew. And eventually we ended up in the United States. And in the United States, I was an active kid who was just active on the issues, right? I was concerned about issues, foreign policy, domestic issues, and got involved. And before I knew it, one thing led to another, and here I am now serving my 20 years in the United States Congress, in essence, fighting for the issues that I think are important. And what makes me tick, the issue that to me is the most important issue of all, is freedom. That is the most important thing. That's what allows for opportunity. That's what allows for prosperity. That's what allows for everything, is freedom. And so that's the driving force and the driving issue that carries me day in, day out, that I fight for, is freedom, whether it's, economic freedom, whether it's political freedom. Those are the issues. That is the main issue that drives me.
So one of those issues that I think drives you, based on your committee assignments and your interest, is support for a strong U.S. Israel relationship. How did you come to become such a strong supporter of this? And what is it about your background that lends itself to being a strong friend of Israel in Washington?
Look, because I think, I understand that there is good and there is evil. And, let's be clear, sometimes good does things that are not all that great, and sometimes evil can do things that are good. But we shouldn't lose that distinction of good and evil. And I think the United States is good, and it's a source of good and a source of hope for the entire world. And not that we don't make mistakes, obviously, from time to time. I think Israel is a source of light in that part of the world. It's good, and it's a country that wants to be left alone, whose people just want to be able to send their children to school, and who want to, and again, the only democracy in that part of the world. And if you understand that there's good and evil, and if you don't confuse good with evil, it's hard to not understand that the United States is good, and so is Israel. And so therefore, I've always believed that Israel not only has the right to exist, it needs to exist. The Jews have suffered for millennia, and Israel is essential. It is the place of refuge, right, for Jews around the planet. But I would also add that it's also an essential ally of the United States, and the United States can never lose its will to do what it takes to protect an ally a friend that shares all of our values, like Israel does, because there is good and evil. Israel is good, and I will always be supportive of a place like Israel that is essential for the survival and the future of the Jewish people, but that's also a source of light and a source of good in the world. And therefore, I'm proud to support the relationship between Israel and the United States, but equally as important, making sure that Israel always is strong, can survive, and can be that source of protection, but that source of good for the entire world. Protection
So,
for the Jews, but source of good for the entire world.
And one of the ways that we work together to keep Israel strong is through your role on the House Appropriations Committee, where you're a senior member and serve on both the Defense Subcommittee and the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee. For those that don't know, every single dollar of U.S. foreign aid for Israel flows through one of those two committees. So thank you for your leadership on those committees, for your efforts on the omnibus bill that passed a couple of weeks ago that had full funding for Israel. So can you tell us a little bit more about your work on the Appropriations Committee, and where does things stand as we are now in the middle of the 2022 or the 2023 appropriations process?
Well, look, yeah, that consumes a lot of my time and effort in Congress is working on the Appropriations Committee. As you know, those are the only bills that actually have to pass, right? If Congress did that and we went home, we would be fulfilling our constitutional obligation. And it's also those bills are where you can get a lot done. You mentioned accurately so that on the Appropriations Committee, in the two subcommittees that I happen to be honored to serve on, two of the three, those are the subcommittees that really Israel that are very heavily that Israel's got a lot of interest in, and the Israel security has a lot of interest in. And so, yeah, you better believe it that I do work and I fight to make sure that Israel has whatever it needs in order to not only survive, but to prosper. The Jewish state of Israel has to be strong because we know that there are folks around it and other countries around it, its neighbors, that do not wish it well. And so I'm honored and pleased to be on those two subcommittees where I can make a huge impact on making sure that Israel has the aid, the assistance that it needs in order to not only survive, but prosper. I think it's important that the world, particularly the enemies, right? And the enemies of Israel are the same enemies that the United States has. The world needs to understand that Israel is exceedingly strong, that Israel cannot be messed with. That's the best way to make sure that Israel never has to use its very strong military force. I would add that that's the same thing for the United States. I think the world is safest and the United States is safest when the United States leads and when the world understands that the United States not only is leading, but has the capability to protect itself and its allies. And same thing goes for Israel. Israel is, as I mentioned before, the source of light, the source of good in that region, and the only democracy in that region. And so you better believe it that if I can have any impact to make sure that Israel has what it needs to protect its people, to defend itself, and to make sure that all of the enemies know that she has a military that is stronger than anybody else, I will do what I can to make sure that continues to be the case.
Thank you. Now, for your entire career in Congress, you've been an outspoken supporter of additional Iranian sanctions. You've been a critic of the 2015 JCPOA. As you know, we're in the middle of 8th, 9th, 10th round of talks between us and the Europeans and the Iranians about a potential return to a JCPOA, a lighter deal, a longer and stronger deal. It's kind of everyone's hope. What is your sense on the Hill of where we are with the Iran negotiations? I think we're all heartened to see actually that the administration is standing strong to not delist the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. That's a good thing. But what's your sense of where things stand at the moment when it comes to a new or going back into the Iran nuclear deal?
I'm actually very, very concerned. I'm very concerned because of the reports that I'm hearing and reading. We saw that a number of State Department people from the United States have actually left their positions because they were so concerned about what they saw as excessive concessions being given from the United States to Iran. And by the way, the fact that the negotiators are Russian and Chinese diplomats, I guess are the ones who are supposed to guarantee our
Yeah.
security interest, that's in the category of like stuff that you just can't make up, but it's the reality. It should concern us all. Look, let's not forget, Iran is the most aggressive sponsor of terrorism in the entire planet, directly and through its affiliates, terrorist groups, affiliated terrorist groups. And I think we need to do everything possible to strengthen sanctions, to weaken Iran, to weaken that dictatorship in Iran, and anything that gives them sanction relief, that gives them some breathing room, I think is dangerous to the national security interests of the world, and clearly dangerous to Israel. I think we need to listen to our allies in the region, particularly Israel. Israel is very concerned. I'm very concerned. And I'm hoping that this administration listens to our allies like Israel and does not, because it might want a deal, does not give in, does not give an inch to what I believe is, again, a terrorist organization, which is the Iranian regime. We should be looking at strengthening sanctions, not weakening. We should be looking at increasing pressure, not giving them any breathing space. So I'm exceedingly concerned. And by the way, that concern, I think, is not just mine. I think it's a bipartisan concern in both the U.S. House and the Senate. And I'm hoping that the administration does not give in just because it wants a deal.
So you talked about Iran's exporting terror. If you look around the Middle East, every major place of instability, they have their hand in. But one of the issues that doesn't get talked about as much, but here in South Florida does, is their increasing influence in Latin America. Can you just talk for a minute about kind of how locally that plays, and is there an opportunity to continue to keep the pressure on Iran here in the Western Hemisphere?
Well, it's not new, right, that they've been influencing and doing bad things in this hemisphere. We go back to the, to Argentina, right?
Yep.
But their presence is, if anything, stronger now than it has ever been. And it's not a presence to try to just help in, trade. It's an evil presence, trying to do bad things to hurt the national security interests of the United States, to hurt the hemisphere, the democracies of the hemisphere. That's what the regime in Tehran does. That's the definition of that regime is a terrorist regime. And so you're absolutely right. It's something that I've been keeping an eye on for many, many years. That influence has not decreased. And so here's the question. Will that influence decrease if they have more money? Will their ability to do bad things decrease if they have more money, or will it just, frankly, fund their terrorist activities around the planet, including in this hemisphere? And I think the answer is pretty obvious. I believe that Iran is one of the most dangerous players in the world today. And as I mentioned at the beginning, right, there's good and there's evil, and we should never forget who's good and who's evil, what state is good and what state is evil. Iran is the definition of a terrorist state. And their influence is felt not only in the Middle East, but also here in this hemisphere, which is why I'm not shy about doing everything possible to weaken Iran. And when I talk about Iran, I'm talking about the regime in Iran, yep, and to strengthen our allies, particularly Israel, that has never been confused about what role Iran plays in this world.
So I know you've taken a number of trips to Israel. I think your last trip was for the opening of the Jerusalem embassy. Is that right? So can you talk for a minute about being there in Jerusalem at the opening of the embassy, which was a historic occasion, and kind of what your sense was from your other trips on the ground about just being in Israel and seeing the challenges and the opportunities that the country has firsthand?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that. I will tell you that in my years in public service, that's probably the most emotional thing that among the most emotional, if not the most emotional time that I've had. The fact that you could feel the joy in the streets in Jerusalem. You could feel that this was an important moment for Israel. But then let me also tell you what struck me was the fact that all of this joy in the streets and this gratitude towards the United States and to the administration for moving our embassy to the capital of a country, right? And that was such a joyful occasion. And what hit me is, wait a second, that's insane. Every country determines where its capital is. Why should Israel not be able to determine where its capital is and where the embassy should be? And so, it was a, bittersweet in the sense that, yes, it was an amazing, joyous experience for me to be there and to witness and to feel what the Israelis were feeling and were expressing. On the other hand, it also made me double down on, wait a second, Israel has the right to determine where the heck its capital is, and other countries have to respect that, like we respect other countries when they decide where their capital is, right? And so that double standard that exists as to how Israel is treated vis-a-vis other countries in the planet can no longer be accepted, whether it's in the UN, whether it's in international organizations, or frankly, other countries that still have not moved their embassy to the capital of Israel. And so again, very impactful moment for me, emotional moment for me, and which just led me to even double down, if it's even possible, right, on my attitude, which is Israel is a democracy. They're a peaceful nation. And of course, they have every right to determine where their capital is, which is Jerusalem. And every country, damn it, needs to recognize that reality and deal with it. And I'm just very, very, very pleased and honored that the United States finally did that.
So that was a big change, I think, that we saw in Israel a couple of years ago. The other kind of major change has been the Abraham Accords, right? The normalization between a handful of Arab countries with Israel. A lot of it had to do with shared concerns about Iran, but also the sense that, why were these countries letting the Palestinians dictate some of their foreign policy when Israel wants to help with economy and trade and industry and investment? And we've seen just unbelievable success and direct flights and trade and investment. So what is your kind of read on Abraham Accords? We're about 18 months in. I know there's been some legislation on Capitol Hill that was part of the omnibus bill that passed a couple of months ago. And do you have any sense of, are there other countries that we think could join the Accords and normalize relations with Israel?
I think you're going to see other countries wanting to do it. And I'm hoping that this administration will pursue that vigorously. Look, I think that was a historic change. The policy, as you mentioned, right, the fact that we were letting the Palestinians or anybody else veto the relationship, which is absurd and to me, frankly, totally unacceptable. And so I think there's been a sea change in attitude, and we saw first, a number of countries come forward. I think you're going to see a lot more because, again, the realization is that Israel is a democracy. It is a peaceful state. It just wants peace. And all of I think some of the fears that some may have had to join this effort of these accords, hopefully has dissipated, and people have realized, look, you can have normalization with Israel. Not only is it not the end of the world, it helps your economy, and it's just good for everybody. So again, it does require the U.S. to pursue it vigorously, but I think that was a historic moment. And I'm hoping we're going to see even more countries join, and I'm pretty confident that's going to happen, and hopefully pretty soon.
Yeah. I know the president is going to Israel end of June. There's some talks about some regional Abraham Accords cooperation. So we are kind of optimistic that ultimately happens when he's on the ground.
Well, as you know, the ones that did join, I think some of them would have not been able to do it without the green light from other countries.
Yep, exactly.
Other countries. So that's why I think that was a historic moment, which we cannot minimize how important it was, but equally important how important it's going to continue to be in the future, as I hope that I'm right, other countries join in.
Yeah. So here at home, we've seen, unfortunately, a rise of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic attacks around the country, including, sadly, here in South Florida. Just last week, you and Debbie Wasserman-Schultz and some other of our strong friends worked on a combatant anti-Semitism resolution that I think passed overwhelmingly, which is 1 no vote. Just can you talk, even though it's not on the AIPAC agenda per se, it's a communal issue that we're all concerned about. Can you just talk for a minute about the impetus for passing this and kind of what else we can do to address this important issue going forward?
Well, look, first let me congratulate and thank my friend and colleague, Debbie Wasserman Schultz for, she had to work awfully hard, and she did most of the heavy lifting to get that to the floor. This is an issue that is not a partisan issue. The issue of Israel and Israel's strength and survival should never be a partisan issue. And there are some amazing colleagues, frankly, from South Florida. I mentioned Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Ted Deutsch, Lois Frankel. Look, we work very, very closely on a number of different issues, not only Israel, but this resolution, I think, was important at this time. We've seen an increase in not only attacks, but statements around the world. We've seen even the UN that seems to be fixated on bashing Israel time and time again, something that to me is totally unacceptable. And so I think it was timely. I was very, very pleased that the vote, only one vote against it. But again, I think a lot of credit goes to my colleague, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Her and I have a million differences, but I will tell you, not only on the issue of Israel, but on the issue of freedom. I mentioned how freedom is what makes me tick, right? That's what my driving force is. I will tell you, I've always found a great ally in these colleagues that I just mentioned and others. And so I'm very grateful to her bringing this up at this moment. Again, it just shows you, I think, the strong bipartisan will there is, an understanding of the importance of Israel, not only to the Jewish people, but to the national security interests of the United States. I know I'm going to be repetitive. Israel is a source of good, a source of light, and it's a privilege to work with some colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Mike McCall, for example, on both sides of the aisle on an issue which I think is very, very important.
All right, with that, Congressman, I want to thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you for your leadership and your support on Capitol Hill, for your leadership here in South Florida, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to keep Israel safe and secure. Thanks,
so look,
everybody.
thank you, and thank you for what you all do, because it's important. I don't think it's ever been as important as now. So let me thank you all of you, for what you do to make sure that Israel is strong and that the relationship between Israel and the United States is also on the forefront when it comes to issues that Congress deals with.
Congressman, thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to continuing to work with you to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship in Washington. And to everybody, thank you for joining us on the AIPAC app.